Screams echoed from the sprawling Tribeca penthouse. Another elite nanny fled the DeLuca estate in tears, bruised by a toddler. New York's most feared underworld kingpin could control the entire city's shipping docks, but his 3-year-old son was a monster. Then came a desperate maid who changed everything. High above the chaotic streets of Manhattan, inside a 15,000-square-foot penthouse at 111 Murray Street, chaos of a different kind reigned supreme. A heavy crystal tumbler shattered against the imported Italian marble floor. "I cannot do this anymore, Mr. DeLuca. He is a demon." Nanny Beatrice, a graduate of the prestigious Norland College in London, stood trembling in the grand foyer. Her usually immaculate beige uniform was stained with strained peas, and a harsh purple bruise was forming on her left shin. She was the 14th nanny hired through the Stanton Nanny Agency in the past 6 months, and like the 13 before her, she was breaking down in hysterics. Matteo DeLuca stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit, his posture was rigid, radiating a silent, terrifying authority. As the head of the DeLuca Syndicate, a family that held quiet, absolute control over New York's underground gambling and luxury import rings, Matteo was a man who moved politicians and destroyed rivals with a single phone call. Yet looking at the weeping child-care professional, his jaw tightened in absolute defeat. "Severance will be wired to your account by noon," Matteo said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that offered no warmth. "My driver is waiting downstairs in the Escalade. Do not speak of this household to anyone, Beatrice. You know the consequences." The nanny nodded frantically, grabbing her Prada tote bag and practically running toward the private elevator. As the brass doors slid shut, Matteo pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling the heavy weight of the platinum Rolex Daytona on his wrist. From down the hallway, the sound of items being violently thrown against the wall continued. It was his son, little Leo. Only 3 years old, yet completely unmanageable since the car explosion that had taken his mother's life 2 years prior. Matteo loved his son fiercely, but the trauma had fractured the boy. Leo didn't speak. He only screamed, kicked, bit, and destroyed. Enter Cameron Jenkins. Cameron was not a nanny. She was a 23-year-old woman drowning in $70,000 of medical debt. Her mother was currently undergoing experimental oncology treatments at Mount Sinai Hospital, and Cameron's meager savings were gone. Desperation had driven her to take a second job through Pristine Heights, a luxury cleaning service that catered to Manhattan's ultra-wealthy. Today was her first day at the DeLuca residence, assigned strictly to scrub the baseboards and polish the baccarat chandeliers. Cameron stepped out of the service elevator, just as the weeping nanny had departed from the main one. She wore a simple grey uniform, her dark hair tied up in a messy bun. She carried a bucket of organic cleaning supplies, keeping her head down. She had been strictly briefed by her supervisor. Do not look Mr. DeLuca in the eye. Do not enter the West Wing. Do not speak unless spoken to. She quietly made her way into the massive, sun-drenched living room. Matteo was still standing by the window, a glass of Macallan 25-year Scotch now in his hand. He didn't even turn around as Cameron knelt on the floor and began polishing the intricate woodwork of a grand piano. Suddenly, a loud primal shriek pierced the air. Little Leo charged into the room. He was a miniature replica of his father, with thick, dark curls and stormy hazel eyes. But right now, his face was red with pure, unrestrained rage. In his hands, he carried a heavy, solid wood toy train. Without warning, he hurled it directly at the nearest target, Cameron. The wooden train struck Cameron hard on the shoulder. She gasped, dropping her polishing cloth. Matteo turned on his heel, his eyes widening. "Leo, no!" he barked, stepping forward. But the toddler was already on the move. He rushed at Cameron, raising his small fists, and kicked her hard in the knee. He expected her to scream. He expected her to cry, to run away to his father, or to scold him. That was what they all did. Cameron winced, rubbing her bruised knee, but she didn't move away. Instead, she slowly lowered herself until she was completely eye level with the furious toddler. The room fell dead silent. Matteo froze, his hand instinctively resting on the concealed Sig Sauer holster beneath his suit jacket, unsure of what this stranger was about to do to his heir. "That was a very big throw," Cameron said. Her voice was not high-pitched or patronizing, but incredibly calm and steady. "And a very strong kick. You must be feeling very, very angry inside to need to hit someone that hard." Leo stopped kicking. His chest heaved as he glared at her, breathing heavily. He raised his fist again. "You can hit me again if it makes the heavy feeling in your chest go away," Cameron whispered, her eyes locking onto his stormy hazel ones. "But I'm not going to leave, and I'm not going to yell at you." For a long, agonizing minute, the toddler stared at the poor maid. His lower lip began to tremble. The terrifying rage that usually consumed him seemed to hit a sudden, invisible wall. Cameron slowly extended her hand, not to grab him, but just leaving it open, offering a silent choice. Leo dropped his fists. He took a hesitant step forward, leaning his small body against Cameron's shoulder. Then, in a move that made Matteo De Luca drop his crystal Scotch glass right onto the marble floor, Leo wrapped his small arms around Cameron's neck and softly pressed a kiss to her cheek. The toddler buried his face in her neck and finally began to cry. Not screams of rage, but the quiet, heartbroken sobs of a grieving child. Cameron wrapped her arms around him, swaying gently on the floor, humming a soft, nameless tune. Matteo stood paralyzed. He hadn't seen his son show affection to anyone, not even to him, in 2 years. He stared at the exhausted, bruised maid sitting on his floor, holding the most precious thing in his dangerous world, and knew his life had just irreversibly changed. 30 minutes later, Cameron sat awkwardly on the edge of a custom-tufted leather chair inside Matteo's private study. The room smelled of expensive Cuban cigars, aged leather, and Tom Ford oud wood. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat the boss of the De Luca family. His dark eyes were fixed on her, calculating and intense. Little Leo was asleep, safely tucked into his custom Ferrari-shaped bed down the hall, having refused to let go of Cameron's hand until his eyes fluttered shut. "Cameron Jenkins," Matteo read from a thin leather folder provided by her cleaning agency. "You live in a cramped studio in Queens. You have 0 childcare credentials. You majored in art history before dropping out 2 years ago to care for an ailing mother. You currently owe Mount Sinai Hospital $73,000. Cameron swallowed hard, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Mr. De Luca, I apologize if I overstepped. I know my job is just to clean the floors." "I am paying off your mother's hospital debt today," Matteo interrupted, his voice smooth but leaving no room for argument. "Furthermore, you are no longer a cleaner. You are moving into the east wing of this penthouse. Your starting salary is $10,000 a week. You belong to my son now." Cameron's breath hitched. 10,000 a week? Sir, I'm not a nanny. I don't know the first thing about child psychology. The professionals with their degrees ran out of my house crying, Matteo said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the desk. The sheer magnetism and danger radiating from him made Cameron's heart pound. "My son just kissed your cheek. He hasn't hugged another human being since his mother was buried. You will stay, Cameron. I protect what is mine. And if you fix my boy, you will never have to worry about money, hospitals, or the world outside again. It was a deal with the devil, and Cameron knew it. The rumors about Matteo De Luca were legendary on the streets. He was a ruthless cartel boss who washed his money through luxury real estate. But thinking of her mother's failing health and the stack of eviction notices back in Queens, Cameron nodded. I'll do it. Within 48 hours, Cameron's life transformed. She traded her cheap subway pass for a life confined inside the gilded cage of the De Luca penthouse. She was given a sprawling suite near Leo's room, an unlimited Black American Express card for the boys' expenses, and a wardrobe of elegant, understated designer clothing chosen by Matteo's personal shopper at Bergdorf Goodman. Yet, life in the Mafia boss's home was a delicate dance on razor wire. Cameron quickly noticed the icy reception from the existing staff. The head housekeeper, an austere woman named Mrs. Higgins, watched Cameron with undisguised venom. Mrs. Higgins had been with the De Luca family for a decade, and she clearly despised the fact that a gutter rat had been elevated to the most trusted position in the household. As days turned into weeks, the dynamic between Cameron and Matteo shifted. Matteo, usually a ghost who vanished into the city's underbelly for days at a time, started coming home early. He would stand silently in the doorway of the playroom, watching Cameron sit on the floor, building Lego castles with Leo. He watched how Cameron never raised her voice, how she gently redirected the boys' violent outbursts with patience. One evening, Matteo hosted a high-stakes dinner in the formal dining room. His guest was Councilman Sterling, a corrupt politician crucial to approving a massive zoning permit for De Luca's waterfront warehouses. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. Armed guards stood by the doors. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors burst open. Leo, having woken up from a nightmare, ran into the room screaming. He grabbed a silver serving tray from a side table, hurling it to the ground with a massive crash. The councilman jumped out of his seat in shock. Matteo's face darkened with embarrassment and rage. Before Matteo could signal his guards to intervene, Cameron rushed into the room barefoot, wearing a simple silk nightgown and a loose cashmere wrap. She didn't look at the powerful politician or the armed men. She dropped to her knees right in the center of the Persian rug and opened her arms. "Leo, mio piccolo leone," she whispered, using the Italian phrase she had secretly spent nights learning just for him. Leo stopped screaming. He dropped the silver candlestick he was about to throw and ran into Cameron's arms, burying his tear-streaked face into her neck. She picked him up effortlessly, murmuring soft words, and carried him right back out of the room without looking back. Councilman Sterling stared, stunned. "Your boy. He is usually impossible to calm, De Luca. That girl has a gift." Matteo didn't answer. His eyes were glued to the doorway where Cameron had disappeared. A strange, possessive heat flared in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He didn't just want her to fix his son anymore. He found himself inexplicably drawn to her quiet strength, her defiance, and her natural beauty. But the penthouse held dark secrets, and Cameron was unknowingly stepping into a trap. The next afternoon, while Leo was napping, Cameron went to the expansive chef's kitchen to prepare his favorite snack. She walked in quietly, her barefoot steps making no sound on the marble. As she rounded the corner, she stopped dead in her tracks. Mrs. Higgins was standing by the counter, holding Leo's sippy cup. With a quick, calculated motion, the older woman pulled a small, unmarked glass vial from her apron pocket. She uncorked it and let 3 drops of a clear liquid fall into the apple juice. Cameron backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She hid behind the pantry door, watching the housekeeper stir the juice with a silver spoon, a cruel smirk on her face. It suddenly clicked in Cameron's mind. The uncontrollable tantrums, the erratic behavior, the fact that 14 nannies had been driven away. Leo wasn't just a traumatized toddler. Someone inside the house was intentionally drugging him, keeping him volatile and unmanageable. But why? And more importantly, who was Mrs. Higgins really working for? Cameron knew if she went to Matteo without absolute proof, the veteran housekeeper would simply deny it, and Cameron would be thrown out, or worse. She was just the new poor maid, while Mrs. Higgins was a trusted family fixture. But as Cameron looked down the hallway toward the sleeping boy she had grown to love, a fierce, maternal protectiveness ignited in her soul. She wasn't going to run. She was going to expose the traitor. But playing a dangerous game of cat and mouse inside the house of a Mafia boss meant one wrong move could cost Cameron her life. Paranoia crept into every gilded corner of the massive Tribeca penthouse. Cameron Jenkins knew she was playing a lethal game of chess against a woman who had spent a decade perfecting her position. Mrs. Higgins was not just a bitter housekeeper. She was a calculated operative, slowly poisoning a 3-year-old boy. But Cameron needed undeniable proof before she could approach a man as dangerous and absolute as Matteo De Luca. Using her newly issued Black American Express card, Cameron arranged a discreet trip to the B&H Photo-Video Superstore on 9th Avenue under the guise of buying a digital camera to document Leo's developmental progress. While there, she quietly purchased a high-definition micro-surveillance lens. That night, while the penthouse slept, Cameron carefully sewed the tiny device into the glass eye of a vintage Steiff teddy bear that sat on the highest shelf of the chef's kitchen pantry. It offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the marble preparation island. For 3 agonizing days, Cameron intercepted every single meal and drink meant for Leo, claiming the toddler would only eat if she personally prepared the plates. Mrs. Higgins's glare grew increasingly venomous, her thin lips pressing into a cruel line whenever Cameron entered the room. The tension in the penthouse was thick enough to cut with a silver steak knife. Meanwhile, the dynamic between Cameron and the Mafia boss was evolving into something wildly intoxicating and undeniably dangerous. Matteo was changing. The ruthless kingpin who previously spent his nights in underground gambling dens in Hell's Kitchen was now coming home at 6 o'clock sharp. He would strip off his bespoke Tom Ford suit jackets, roll up his expensive silk sleeves, and sit on the plush floor of the playroom. To the absolute shock of his heavily armed security detail, the feared boss of the De Luca syndicate was building intricate wooden train tracks with his son and the former maid. One evening, after Leo had finally fallen asleep without a single night terror, Matteo found Cameron standing on the expansive rooftop terrace, the glittering skyline of Manhattan reflected in her dark eyes. The cool October wind whipped through her hair. "You look troubled, Cameron," Matteo said, his deep, gravelly voice sending a sudden shiver down her spine. He stepped beside her, radiating a heavy, masculine heat. He handed her a crystal flute of Dom Perignon. "I am just thinking about my mother," Cameron lied smoothly, taking the champagne. Her mother was actually doing miraculously well. The experimental treatments at Mount Sinai, fully funded by Matteo's offshore accounts, were shrinking the tumors rapidly. "And I'm thinking about Leo. He is so smart, Mr. De Luca. So full of light." "Matteo," he corrected softly, turning to face her. The moonlight caught the sharp, aristocratic angles of his jaw. "Behind closed doors to you, my name is Matteo." He reached out, his calloused thumb gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was electric. Cameron's breath hitched in her throat. She looked up into his stormy hazel eyes, the exact same eyes as his son, and saw a fierce, burning hunger that had absolutely nothing to do with gratitude. "You saved him," Matteo murmured, stepping closer until she could smell his cologne, a heady mix of cedar, tobacco, and expensive bourbon. "You brought my son back from the dead, and in doing so, you woke me up, too. I don't know what kind of magic you possess, Cameron Jenkins, but I know I never want you to leave this house." He leaned in, his lips hovering mere inches from hers. Cameron's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wanted him. Despite the danger, despite the blood on his hands, she had fallen deeply, terrifyingly in love with the broken man beneath the monster's reputation. But as his lips brushed hers in a searing, breathless kiss, the harsh reality of her secret mission crashed over her. If she distracted herself with Matteo now, Mrs. Higgins would find a way to drug Leo again. Cameron gently, painfully pulled back, her hands resting flat against his solid chest. "Matteo, I need more time," she whispered, her voice trembling. "There are things in this house, things you don't see." Matteo frowned, his protective instincts instantly flaring. "What does that mean? Who is disrespecting you? Give me a name, Cameron, and they are gone." "Not yet," she pleaded, stepping away from the intoxicating warmth of his body. "Just trust me a little longer." The next morning, Cameron's patience paid off. While the penthouse staff was busy preparing for a massive charity gala Matteo was hosting that evening at the Pierre Hotel, Cameron locked herself in her ensuite bathroom with her laptop. She synced the footage from the stiff bear hidden in the kitchen. Her blood ran cold as she watched the high-definition video. It was time-stamped from 5 a.m. that morning. The video clearly showed Mrs. Higgins standing at the kitchen island. The housekeeper pulled out the familiar glass vial, uncorked it, and laced a freshly baked batch of blueberry muffins with the clear liquid. But this time, Cameron saw something else. Mrs. Higgins pulled a burner cell phone from her apron and made a call. The kitchen was dead silent, allowing the camera's microphone to pick up her hushed, raspy voice. "The boy is becoming a problem," Mrs. Higgins hissed into the phone. "The new girl watches him like a hawk. He's too stable. Silvio is getting impatient. If Dominic Rossi wants Matteo to look weak in front of the commission, the boy needs to have a complete psychotic break at the gala tonight. Yes. I tripled the dose in the muffins. I'll make sure the girl feeds them to him." Cameron clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp of pure horror. Silvio. Matteo's own underboss, his right-hand man. He was conspiring with Dominic Rossi, the vicious head of the rival Brooklyn syndicate. They were intentionally driving Matteo's heir insane to prove to the Mafia commission that Matteo was a distracted, weak father, unfit to run the largest shipping empire on the East Coast. Cameron ripped the USB drive from her laptop. She had to find Matteo immediately. She threw open her bedroom door, sprinting down the long, carpeted hallway toward Matteo's private study. But as she rounded the corner near the grand staircase, a heavy, calloused hand clamped violently over her mouth. Cameron screamed into the thick leather glove, dropping the USB drive onto the plush Persian rug. A strong arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her entirely off the floor. "Snooping is a very dangerous habit for a maid," a rough voice growled in her ear. She was dragged backward into the shadows of the library. Standing by the heavy oak doors, holding a silenced pistol, was Silvio, and standing right beside him, holding a sleeping, limp little Leo in her arms, was Mrs. Higgins. "Take her down to the wine cellar," Mrs. Higgins sneered, her eyes gleaming with malice. "The boss is already at the Pierre setting up the security perimeter. By the time he realizes the girl and the boy are missing, Dominic Rossi will already have his new hostage." The DeLuca wine cellar was a subterranean fortress beneath the Tribeca high-rise, lined with thousands of bottles of rare vintages, insulated by thick concrete walls and secured by a heavy biometric steel door. Cameron was thrown violently onto the cold stone floor. Silvio didn't even bother tying her up. The door required Matteo's thumbprint to open from the inside. "Scream all you want, sweetheart," Silvio mocked, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. "Enjoy the vintage Pinot. We'll be taking a private helicopter ride to Brooklyn with the little prince." The heavy steel door slammed shut. The electronic lock hissed, sealing Cameron in total darkness. Panic threatened to crush her chest, but the image of Leo's limp, drugged body in the housekeeper's arms ignited a blazing inferno of maternal rage inside her. She scrambled to her feet, her hands feeling along the cold stone walls until she found the master light switch. The cellar flooded with dim, amber light. Cameron scanned the room desperately. There were no windows, no vents large enough to crawl through. The biometric lock panel on the door was encased in shatterproof glass, but shatterproof did not mean indestructible. She ran to the furthest rack, searching for the heaviest bottle she could find. Her fingers closed around the thick, double magnum base of a 1982 Chateau Petrus. It weighed nearly 10 pounds. Cameron marched back to the steel door. She wrapped her cashmere sweater around her hands to protect them from the glass, raised the priceless bottle of wine high above her head, and brought it down on the electronic control panel with every ounce of strength in her body. Crash. Red wine and shattered glass exploded everywhere. The panel dented, but the light remained red. "Come on!" Cameron screamed, raising the jagged, heavy base of the bottle again. She struck the panel a second time, then a third. Her hands were bleeding, her muscles screaming in agony. But the face of the little boy who had kissed her cheek flashed in her mind. With a final, guttural yell, she smashed the bottle directly into the center of the wiring. Sparks flew. A loud metallic clack echoed through the cellar. The heavy locking mechanism disengaged. Cameron shoved the heavy door open and bolted up the service stairs, her breath tearing through her lungs. She bypassed the main penthouse and headed straight for the private elevator that led to the rooftop helipad. If Silvio was taking Leo to Brooklyn, they would leave by air. Cameron burst through the rooftop access doors, just as the deafening roar of an Augusta Westland AW-109 helicopter began to spin up. The freezing night wind whipped furiously around her. Silvio was walking toward the chopper, carrying Leo over his shoulder like a sack of flour. Mrs. Higgins trailed behind him, clutching her purse. "Stop!" Cameron screamed, sprinting across the tarmac, slipping off her shoes to run faster. Silvio turned, his eyes widening in shock. He dropped Leo roughly onto the tarmac and pulled his weapon. But before he could aim at Cameron, the rooftop access doors exploded open. "Silvio!" The roar was louder than the helicopter engine. Matteo De Luca stood in the doorway, an absolute vision of pure, unadulterated violence. He held a sleek, black submachine gun. Behind him stood a dozen of his most lethal enforcers. Matteo hadn't gone to the hotel. He had found Cameron's dropped USB drive in the hallway and watched the footage. Silvio panicked, raising his gun toward Cameron. Matteo didn't hesitate. He didn't issue a warning. He fired 3 precise shots. Silvio collapsed onto the tarmac, completely neutralized. Mrs. Higgins shrieked, dropping to her knees in terror. Matteo's men swarmed the helipad, instantly securing the perimeter and dragging the weeping, treacherous housekeeper away by her hair. Cameron didn't care about the gunfire or the blood. She threw herself onto the cold tarmac, sliding to where little Leo lay. The toddler was groggy, blinking his stormy hazel eyes against the harsh floodlights. "Cameron," he mumbled, his tiny voice slurred from the drugs. "I'm here, baby," Cameron sobbed, pulling him tightly against her chest, rocking him back and forth. "I've got you. Nobody is ever going to hurt you again." Matteo dropped his weapon and fell to his knees beside them on the freezing concrete. The ruthless Mafia boss, the man who controlled half the city, wrapped his massive arms around both the poor maid and his drugged son, burying his face in Cameron's neck. He was shaking. "You saved him," Matteo whispered, his voice cracking with raw, unfiltered emotion. "You saved my entire world, Cameron." 6 months later, the De Luca syndicate had been violently purged. Dominic Rossi was serving a life sentence after an anonymous tip from Matteo's lawyers delivered an irrefutable mountain of evidence to the FBI. The treacherous Mrs. Higgins and Silvio were gone, their names never spoken again in the Tribeca penthouse. Cameron's mother, fully recovered and glowing with health, sat in the front row of a breathtaking private garden at the New York Botanical Gardens. Cameron stood at the altar, wearing a stunning, custom-designed Vera Wang gown made of imported Italian lace. Beside her stood Matteo, looking terrifyingly handsome in a classic black tuxedo. But the true star of the wedding was the ring-bearer. Little Leo, dressed in a tiny tuxedo like his father's, walked down the aisle with a bright, fearless smile, clutching the velvet pillow. He rushed the last steps, straight into Cameron's arms. Matteo took her hand, sliding a flawless 6-carat diamond onto her finger. "You came to clean my floors," he murmured, brushing a kiss against her lips, ignoring the priest. "But you cleaned the darkness out of me." Cameron held Leo close, smiling softly. She was no longer the desperate maid from Queens. She was Cameron De Luca, queen of the underworld, protector of the air, and the only woman who could tame him. Did this thrilling Mafia romance keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved watching Cameron tame the ruthless boss and save little Leo, hit that like button right now. Please share this incredible story with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more heart-pounding drama videos every single week. We need your support to create more. Drop a comment below with your favorite plot twist today.